Good morning, everyone. I'm welcoming you all to our IC on the anterior segment imaging. Though people are shy of using it, but we are going to give you some hidden clues and unseen treasures. We will have gonioscopy lecture first, so that we won't forget about doing it. It is a gold standard, but there are something or some cases or incidences where you would like to use anterior segment imaging. So that will be covered by rest of the speaker. So let us start first with Dr. Sunil Jain.
Can I share my screen?
Yes, please. Can we stop my... Dr. Sunil Jain is practicing in Mumbai. He is doing glaucoma practice since more than 25 years. And his main interest is in the glaucoma surgeries and the difficult cases. Today, he will be talking to us on the angle evaluation with gonioscopy, but he will highlight the limitations too. So Sunil bhai, please.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. Thank you for having me in part of the this instruction course. So we all know the importance of gonioscopy, and it being a gold standard, obviously in a patient of a glaucoma, you can't afford to not to do a gonioscopy. The reason being because it allows you to view the actual site of impedance of the aqueous outflow, and also helps you to detect mechanisms which are responsible for secondary glaucomas. The important thing is it has to be repeated periodically to detect emergence of additional mechanisms. Okay, so this is how a normal angle anatomy would appear. So from anterior to posterior, the Schwalbe's line is the first structure you need to identify, followed by the trabecular meshwork, then the scleral spur, ciliary body band, and the iris root. So whenever you do a gonioscopy, you need to first answer certain questions, because that will help you in detecting whether the patient has an open angle or a closed angle. So these are the questions which you need to answer. So whenever you want to answer whether the angle is occludable or not, first you have to dim the room lights and see to it that the slit beam does not cross the pupil, because that will cause artificial constriction of the pupil, and a closed angle might appear open. And hence you do what is known as the corneal wedge test. So when the slit beam is focused into the angle structures, the slit beam gets divided into an epithelial beam and an endothelial beam. Okay, and it comes to a focus at the Schwalbe's line. This is where the Descemet's membrane is located of the cornea. Okay, and once you identify the structures, and then you can grade the deeper structures. So this is a corneal wedge test which has to be performed to grade the angle structures. So then according to what angle structures you see, you can grade it as per whatever grading you prefer. Once you have diagnosed that it's an closed angle or an occludable angle, you have to just do the step of indentation gonioscopy, because this will help you determine whether it's an appositional closure or a cynical angle closure. And this is possible only with a 4-mirror gonioscopy. After that, you increase the illumination, let the pupil constrict so that you can look at the deeper structures and identify any additional mechanisms which could be adding to the secondary glaucoma. Also, you need to look at the peripheral iris. So this is how a normal regular curvature is of the iris is seen. If it's a bit convex, it could be a pupillary glaucoma. If it's a concave thing, usually seen in either pigmentary glaucoma, aphakic glaucomas. Also, the incision of iris, especially in juvenile glaucomas, you will see there is more of an anterior incision of the peripheral iris. So gonioscopy is not only essential for diagnostic, but it is also used for therapeutic purposes. Let's go through certain clinical examples. This is how a wide open angle or primary open angle glaucoma gonio would appear as. And this is how a narrow angle or occludable angle. Now, you might mistaken this area as to be the trabecular meshwork because of pigmentation, but it's only when you do indentation, you'll realize the entire lens diaphragm moves backwards, and you'll see the cynical angle closure, and the trabecular meshwork is located here. Okay, and hence the importance of indentation gonioscopy. After you've done an iridotomy, okay, and you overcome the pupillary block, you will see probably the sine wave sign, and this indicates a plateau iris. This is how angle structure would appear in a developmental glaucoma. Okay, this is basically to show you difference. These are iris processes. These are normal iris processes, and they are fine fibril-like structures from the stroma of the iris along the concavity. And to compare it with the synechiae would be broad-based, and there will be peripheral pulling up of the iris. Neovascular glaucoma, you might miss out on the pupillary margins, the rubeosis. It's only on gonioscopy you might see the arborization, which is extending over the trabecular mesh. This is how a fibrovascular ingrowth would appear. Okay, sometimes when the tumor of a ciliary body penetrates deeper into the angle structure, you might see as a peripheral anterior synechiae out there. This is how a pigmentary glaucoma would appear. You can see the trabecular mesh pigmentation with the Sampolicis line. Pseudo exfoliation in the angle structures also can be seen. Post cataract surgery, you could have vitreous loss causing increased pigmentation of the trabecular meshwork and inflammation of the trabecular meshwork because of the vitreous. Old generation antechamber lenses could cause complete synechial angle closure. Post phaco, if a epinucleus piece is left behind, that could cause intermittent uveitis and glaucoma. This is how an angle recession glaucoma would appear. You can see the white ciliary body band. Okay, in uveitic glaucoma, you will see goniosynechiae, but it's so different from an angle closure because you can see the wide open angles in between. Silicon oil glaucoma. Post trabeculectomy also sometimes gonioscopy helps you, especially if the pressure starts rising immediate post-operatively. You see the peaking of pupil, and when you do a gonioscopy, you'll realize it's the peripheral iris which is obstructing the internal ostium. Sometimes there could be vitreous incarceration also in the ostium. This could be a rare condition where a patient has undergone a small incision cataract surgery, developing a pseudo bleb, and it's only on gonioscopy you'll realize it's the fish mouthing of the wound which is causing the pseudo bleb to appear. However, though being a gold standard, there are certain limitations, like in any technique, less reproducibility, errors which are induced by the technique because of the light conditions. Sometimes you may not be able to visualize the angle structures properly. And because of the corneal indentation, the folds might cause the vision, the angle structures, again, not to be visualized clearly. Also, the inability of the to visualize structures which are posterior to the iris, okay, and hence you could miss out on certain features and certain conditions. For example, in plateau iris, you might not be able to see obviously the absence of the ciliary sulcus or the medial rotation of the ciliary processes. In a malignant glaucoma, because the anterior chamber is already very shallow, you won't be able to do the gonioscopy. It's only basically you have to use other modalities, imaging modalities to diagnose. A supraciliary effusion leading to angle closure, causing a shallow chamber. And again, you might miss out on the supraciliary effusion because you can't see with a gonioscopy what's beyond the iris. An iris cyst might appear as a pupillary block glaucoma. It's only when you do these imaging technologies, you will be able to see and diagnose an iris cyst. Sometimes malpositioned intraocular lenses causing a UGH syndrome. And because the haptic would be constantly irritating the ciliary body or the iris, causing UGH. This can be detected only on imaging technologies. Post-trauma, you could have a supraciliary effusion or a cleft, and which again cannot be seen by a gonioscopy. Quantitative angle analysis, especially if you want to do research and also you want to do the dark room test and you want to evaluate based on this, it is not possible doing a gonioscopy. So gonioscopy is mandatory for the diagnosis and management of glaucoma. Also, evaluation of the internal ostium in the post-trabeculectomy period, and also in diagnosing certain non-glaucomatous conditions such as inadvertent blebs. But it too has its limitations, and hence that's where the role of imaging devices comes into play. Thank you.
It was excellent lecture. You covered almost everything. But as he said correctly, there are some conditions like pigments or the blood vessels or the pseudo exfoliation material that cannot be visualized with the intersegment imaging, and 360-degree viewing is also not possible. Now we have the second speaker, Dr. Medha Prabhudesai. Please share your screen. She is practicing glaucoma since 30 years at Pune. She is a director of the institute, and she has authored Atlas of Optic Nerve Head Evaluation and Glaucoma, and international phase 3 studies been done for multiple drugs bioequivalent for the glaucoma, and she has presented many papers and presentations at national international congress. I welcome you, Medha, please.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Mayuri, for your kind introduction. Good morning, everybody. So I'm going to talk on identification of anterior chamber angle landmarks and quantification on ASOCT. We all know and we already heard that assessment of ideocorneal angle can be done by gonioscopy, which is a very good technique and it's a gold standard, but it has limitations. It can be done with the help of UBM and also AS imaging. This can overcome these limitations to certain extent and is useful in clinical practice and for research. So assessment of the AS structures involved in the pathogenesis of glaucoma can be done by AS imaging. This provides a definition of ocular tissues comparable to histology, comparable to those obtained with UBM, but it is more useful than UBM because of serial monitoring of the angle is possible with the help of alignment with ocular landmarks. So OCT, we know it's a low coherence interferometry. It's a non-contact cross-sectional 3D images can be got, and it gives us a high resolution images of the anterior segment. Depth of penetration is almost 2 to 7 millimeters of mercury, and it is a rapidly advancing field of ophthalmology. So it helps in evaluation of patients with the help of static and dynamic biometric risk factors for angle closure disease, secondary glaucomas, and also it can assess efficacy of glaucoma interventions like laser peripheral iridotomy or glaucoma surgery. There are various OCT technologies available, but the information available is not interchangeable because they differ in their technology, modeling parameters, dewarping algorithms, and assumptions about. So advantages is we can identify patients at risk for angle closure. We have as compared to gonioscopy, we can have non-contact. It can be done with any lighting conditions. It can be performed by a technician and interpreted by physician. Angle assessed with physiologic light conditions is helpful because with scans can be taken with lights on and off. So it mimics the physiologic and angle of any patient. So it is also helpful in patients understanding. Show this diagram to a patient and show how his eye is behaving, they understand it immediately. So coming to angle structures, we know this diagrammatic representation, how to identify a scleral spur and spur and other factors. So we know, we have seen that how a corneal wedge has to be identified and how it corresponds with gonioscopy diagrams. Now let's see how we can identify structures on ASOCT. So this is a Schwalbe's line here, and this is the scleral spur. We will see in detail now. So scleral spur is defined as an inward protrusion of the sclera where a change in the curvature of the corneoscleral junction is there at the junction of trabecular meshwork and the ciliary body. So this is scleral spur. Schwalbe's line is defined as a posterior limbal zone bordering the cornea where Descemet's membrane terminates, and this can be identified on ASOCT, and you can definitely see where the Schwalbe's line is there. Also, the distance, that is the length of the trabecular meshwork, is between from Schwalbe's line to the scleral spur. So Schlemm's canal can be identified on this, and this is an area, a loosened curvilinear area from SS to the anterior tip of the trabecular meshwork. The most important one more finding here we can have is the bell, that is the band of extracanalicular limbal lamina, which can be seen between the Schlemm's canal and the trabecular meshwork, and this is seen as luminescent area. And here it was previously identified as TM shadow, and people didn't know what is the significance, but now it has been seen that it is spatially, it has a better visibility and seen in open angles as compared to closed angle. So this is how we can identify the Schwalbe's line. This is wedge we know of how we look on gonioscopy. This is the scleral spur, and this is the angle. We know that it is a narrow opening over there. Another patient, Schwalbe's line here. This is the wedge, scleral spur, and this is the angle, and we know it is open qualitatively. So, but how do we quantify this? So there are certain ocular biometrics which is quantifiable by ASOCT as predictors of primary angle closure disease. These can be static risk factors like shallow anterior chamber, increased iris volume, lens vault, anterior chamber depth, angle opening distance, and TISA. There can be dynamic risk factors which are going to see in detail. So what is lens vault? This is a novel parameter, and this is a perpendicular distance between the anterior pole of the lens and an imaginary horizontal line joining the two scleral spurs. So this is independently associated with angle closure, and larger values of LV suggest increased crowding and the upper quartile has a 48 times higher risk of angle closure than a lower quartile in a statistical graph. So anterior chamber depth, we all know this is the posterior corneal surface to anterior lens curvature distance, and anterior chamber width again is a novel risk indicator for angle closure, and this is the distance between the two scleral spurs. The next is the anterior vault. So anterior vault is the addition of anterior chamber depth plus lens vault, but the relative lens vault is more important because this is lens vault divided by the anterior vault. So we know as the lens thickness goes up, lens vault values will increase, and this will increase the relative lens values, lens vault. So PSCGs have larger relative lens vault as compared to normalize, and this is a better indicator than LV. So this is lens vault. Static risk factors include iris area. This is the cross-sectional area of the iris throughout the length. Iris thickness, this is a thickness where there is a maximum curvature of the maximum thickness of the iris. And this is iris curvature from the perpendicular line joining the two surfaces or the two ends of the iris. So next is angle opening distance. It's in millimeters. So this is a point between scleral from the anterior chamber to the opposing iris, and angle recess area. This is also ARA 500 and 750. It is bounded by the anterior iris surface and the inferior inner corneoscleral wall. Next is TISA. This is the trapezoidal area 500 or 750, and it is bounded by the AOD 500 or 750, the anterior iris surface, the inner corneoscleral wall, and a perpendicular distance between the scleral spur and the opposing iris. So these are also important. These factors, statistics factors, are associated with the refractive errors, and they have found lower values in hyperometropia of all, that is AOD 500, 750, and TISA 500 and TISA 750. So quantitative associated studies reveal significant anatomical variation along the 360 span of an angle, and generally angles are more narrow superiorly and inferiorly, and they are open temporally and nasally. So these anatomic variations may affect the aqueous outflow, especially in angle closure eyes. So we have to have a multi-image approach of anterior angle landmarks and anatomy also, instead of a single TN cross-sectional image. So for this, there is another index, another quantifiable factor, which is a iridotrabecular contact, that is ITC. So presence and detection of ITC is very important because it is the hallmark in eyes with angle closure glaucoma. It is vital in deciding about laser iridotomy. Indentation darkroom gonioscopy is a gold standard to detect oppositional closure, but it is subject to inter-observer variability also. And even light during the gonioscopy may induce pupillary constriction and may open narrow angles, and it can be missed. So ITC index is the extent of angle closure across 360-degree circumference. So this red circle represents the scleral spur, and green line is the end point of ITC, which can differ in one particular patient like this. It can be very anterior also, and it can be a totally normal. So this will give us an blue area, which is area of ITC. And again, this will give us an ITC index in percent. So this is helpful wherever we do some intervention, whether the ITC index is different or not. So this is after PI, that there is a change in ITC index from almost 67% to 35%. And we also can note that the blue area has definitely decreased from the first and the second image. So, but these statistical factors, which are, yes, I'll take 1 minute more. So there are multiple areas, but it has been shown that they are not very accurate. So coming to dynamic risk factors, which we know that there is a structural change with iris dilatation, and occludable angles also have post-dilatation, less reduction in iris volume. So this is a study. So I'll just show 1 or 2 slides, photopic and scotopic pupil. So this is again photopic, scotopic. There is a classification based on ASOCT. So these are the mechanisms of PSCG. Different 4 mechanisms have been identified. A pupillary block here, a plateau iris, thick peripheral iris, and lens vault. So this is a PSC, and post PI it opens up. This is again a PSE, pre-dilatation and post-dilatation. This is pre-iridoplasty and post-iridoplasty. This is convex iris in pigmentary glaucoma. Chronic angle closure, how it looks like because of the peripheral anterior synecdoche. This is occlusio pupillae. This is occlusio pupillae post-uveitic, which opens up, and this is angle dysgenesis. So thank you for your patient hearing. So this is not to replace conventional gonioscopy, but to supplement angle evaluation. Major advantages are it is non-contact, repeatability and reproducibility there, and we can have quantitative and qualitative information, may help in screening programs for PSCG and improve our understanding of surgery, and it is an invaluable tool for ophthalmic research. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Medha. It was very, very informative and as usual, excellent presentation. Now I invite Dr. Chandrima. Chandrima, please share your slides. She doesn't need any introduction. At present, she is Executive Secretary of Glaucoma Society of India. She is a director of BBI Institute and she has worked a lot, and she's also has done the West Bengal population study, which was excellent. Thank you, Chandrima, for being with us. Please continue.
Thank you very much, Mayuriben, and it's indeed a pleasure for me and a great honor to be a part of your course. And I'm going to take you through role of UBM in primary angle closure disease. So to start with, UBM is a high-frequency ultrasound biomicroscopy, high-resolution, non-invasive in vivo imaging of the anterior segment based on 50 to 100 MHz transducers incorporated into a B-mode and clinical scanner. Pathophysiologic changes involving anterior segment architecture can be evaluated qualitatively and quantitatively. Higher frequency transducers provide finer resolution of more superficial structures, whereas lower frequency transducers provide greater depth of penetration with less resolution. Commercially available units operate at 50 and provide lateral and axial physical resolutions of approximately 50 microns mu and 25 mu microns respectively. So tissue penetration is approximately 4 to 5 millimeters. The scanner produces a 5 by 5 millimeter field with 256 vertical image lines or A-scans at a scan rate of 8 frames per second. When performing the UBM, the requirement for a saline bath through which sound waves are transmitted necessitates contact with the eye, usually in the form of a scleral cup or a corneal probe. So my previous speakers have very nicely spoken about gonioscopy and the anterior segment. So just to reiterate whatever they have said is that gonioscopy remains the gold standard and of treatment in angle closure, diagnosis rather. But here is a closed angle where maybe gonioscopy can diagnose it, but to do a little bit more justice to it, we need to take resort to the UBM or the anterior segment OCT. So that's a ultrasound biomicroscopy appearance of the normal eye. So if you look at that, the cornea and then the sclera and everything is labeled there, anterior chamber, posterior chamber, iris, ciliary body, and the lens capsule also you can see out there, and lens can be identified, the scleral spur. That is the most important point in the UBM, which you must be very familiar with if you are to diagnose anything with the UBM. And this Dr. Medha has spoken is more or less the same, so I won't go into details of that. So we come to the open angle, which is fine, we see everything. Then we come to the closed angle. This is a closed angle which is seen on the UBM. So UBM is essential for specific types of trauma, congenital anomalies, and anterior segment tumors, and has found clinical utility in a broad spectrum of diseases for structural assessments, not limited to the anterior intraocular anatomy, but also for eyelid and the orbit anatomy. So these are the uses of the UBM apart from glaucoma. And primary acute angle closure glaucoma, so pupillary block or plateau iris, has a huge role in UBM. Secondary causes of angle closure with a shallow chamber, aqueous misdirection syndrome, or the inflammation of the ciliary body. So today I'm going to concentrate mainly on this part of the UBM. So angle with narrow entry, that's how you see it in the UBM, and peripheral anterior synechia, that's how you see it. So this is a picture of the UBM where it's a narrow angle before giving pilocarpine. This is post pilocarpine, and this is after a YAG PI has been done. There are better images of it just coming. So occludable angle with darkroom provocation test. A out here, the anterior chamber angle is, as you see out here, slit-like open under lighted conditions, and the ankle is completely occluded under dark conditions. Pupillary block, just a word, a line about ASOCT here is that it's much better identified by the UBM because you have the depth in the UBM, which lacks in the ASOCT. So next we come to pupillary block in a more detailed manner in the UBM. The angle shows oppositional closure, as you see out there, owing to the anterior bowing of the iris. And in B, you see the angle is open with a flattened iris after laser peripheral iridotomy, which can be seen out here. And that's also another picture where you can see the patency of the peripheral laser iridotomy. So a few points on the plateau iris. It's about 32.3% in the cohort of primary angle closure suspects using UBM, and risk factors are female, younger age, all that you know, pathophysiology also you know. So I'll just go into the difference of the iris configuration, plateau iris configuration and the plateau iris syndrome. So flat central iris plane, but normal AC depth. Angle recess is very narrow with a sharp iris angulation over anteriorly positioned or oriented ciliary processes. A component of the pupillary block is present and a PI is curative here. But in the plateau iris syndrome, occurrence of an angle closure despite a patent iridotomy in a patient with morphological plateau iris. So if you have a look at that, the presence of an anteriorly directed ciliary body, an absent ciliary sulcus, a steep iris root from its point of insertion, followed by a downward angulation of the sclerocorneal wall, and the presence of a centrally flat iris plane and irido-angle contact. So the plateau iris, a large and anteriorly positioned ciliary body, actually pushes this entire thing up and holds the iris root up against the cornea, leading to a partially occluded angle, as you see out there. And this is actually the gonioscopy part of it, the double hump that you see, the sine wave sign, and that's the UBM part of it. That's one hump owing to the ciliary processes and the other owing to the lens. So pigment dispersion syndrome, the angle is wide with a concave iris, extremely wide, iridolenticular contact. Next, we move on to UBM confirmed at 360-degree. Ciliochoroidal effusion and anterior rotation of the ciliary process and forward displacement of the lens iris diaphragm in both eyes. So this is a common picture we see in bilateral angle closure, which generally happens with drugs like topiramate, which are used nowadays very commonly for migraine. So ciliochoroidal effusion, as you see, the star out there from the scleral spur, detachment of the ciliary body and an anterior rotation of the ciliary processes. So next we can use the UBM post-surgery following trabeculectomy in angle closure eyes. So here actually it's quite relevant because evaluation of the postoperative complications after trabeculectomy can be used to detect and evaluate extent of postoperative complications such as ciliochoroidal effusion and cyclodialysis, which I just told you about. And here after trabeculectomy, you can actually see the patency of the sclerostomy aperture, patency of the peripheral iridectomy, and the filtering bleb actually can be graded with the UBM. So as you see out here, low reflective, high reflective, or encapsulated. So that's another very important use of the UBM following trabeculectomy. Then if you've used an aqueous drainage device, then it's instrumental in diagnosing the presence and cause of occlusion of the aqueous drainage device. This also happens very often in angle closure glaucoma, where we've used a tube and the tube gets blocked due to the shallow AC that's there in angle closure. So the UBM actually there plays a good role. In malignant glaucoma, extremely shallow anterior chamber, occluded angle, forward rotation of the ciliary body, as you can see out there, without fluid in the suprachoroidal space, so it can diagnose malignant glaucoma. So evaluation of success of these cycloablative procedures which are there nowadays, UBM has been used to image early and late ciliary body alterations after transclerin cyclophotocoagulation and to establish the position of the ciliary body to ensure correct laser probe placement, to locate ciliary body residuals for retreatment and to rule out scleral damage after the procedure. So the UBM has a host of uses starting right from diagnosing up to post-surgical and post all these procedures. So UBM is non-invasive and can provide useful anatomic information and structures hidden by the iris or a cloudy cornea. It's indispensable for qualitative and quantitative assessment of the anterior segment. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Chandrima. Again, an excellent presentation. Now I'm looking forward to listening to Dr. Hansa Thakkar. She is a professor and director at RIO Ahmedabad MNJ Institute of Ophthalmology. She is in a teaching job since 1987, and I have seen her doing UBM in all her patients, and she has an excellent collection of those UBM patients pictures, and she will be sharing with us how you can use UBM for the pseudophakic glaucoma, where sometimes we can't understand why patient is having glaucoma. Hansa, please.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Mayuriben, for including me in this amongst these learned speakers in glaucoma. So my previous speakers have made my job very easy. They have narrated all the imaging techniques in glaucoma so far. So I will directly move on to my topic of the day, that is UBM in pseudophakic glaucoma. Here is the normal UBM picture of a phakic eye, and this is UBM in a pseudophakic eye, where rest of the anatomical configuration is normal, and most importantly, IOL is not in touch with uveal tissue anywhere, which is the culprit to make the problem. So I always salute these people who have invented this interesting and amazing technology to view the anterior segment so nicely, but I don't have any financial interest to share. In the latest publication on UBM in pseudophakic glaucoma, it has been stated that almost all the causes can be detected by UBM except a very few. So in very small number, like corticosteroid-induced glaucoma, we cannot make out the real etiology on UBM, but rest of all can be very well delineated on UBM. So role of UBM in pseudophakic glaucoma is mainly to access the causative mechanism, and thereby we can plan for the management. Here we can see posterior synechia doing optic capture, and in turn peripheral anterior synechia. These causes can be divided for this ease amongst IOL related causes, surgical procedure related causes, intraocular inflammation following surgery, and some pre-existing causes at times, but they are very greatly interrelated. We cannot 100% depart one from the other, and thereby mechanism of raised intraocular pressure we can make out in pseudophakic eye. Main culprit is IOL malposition or tilted IOL. Usually in these cases, there is corneal edema. And so slit lamp examination, gonioscopy will have some limitation. Practically, on UBM, we can see IOL anywhere inside, maybe floating in aqueous, maybe tilted in its place, but elevating the iris by its haptic, or optic itself may be in contact with endothelium. It's not surprising to see more than one intraocular lenses inside when you use UBM for diagnosis, one floating, the other scleral fixating, entangling the uveal tissue and irritating. Here slit lamp doesn't show any presence of intraocular lens, but it is tilted and hidden by the iris in the vitreous. Some people are very enthusiastic and put PCIOL in AC, and we can know that it is irritating the angle all the time. Or there may be all round optic capture and IOL is swinging inside, and haptics are lifting the iris to be pushed in the angle. Malignant glaucoma, as described by my previous speaker very nicely, there is no posterior chamber, which is the most important diagnostic feature. During surgery, if there is posterior capsule rupture or zonular descents, then vitreous will prolapse in the AC. If it is fully covering the pupil, there is pupillary block, or it might be touching the endothelium and the lens is floating in the vitreous, then we can know the cause. In some cases, there is excessive lens matter, which results into Somarin's rings, and that also at times blocks the pupil, causes secondary rise of pressure. At times, we can get the total anterior synechia, iris totally adherent to the corneal endothelium. Scleral fixation IOL, haptics are irritating the ciliary body all the time. There is, or at times, the IOL is halfway in anterior chamber, half in posterior chamber, one haptic in angle, the other one on the ciliary body. Or there may be gross damage during surgery, resulting into Descemet stare, optic capture, and posterior synechia, and thereby finally peripheral anterior synechia. Or there may be iridodialysis, lens tilted so much that the haptic is pushing the iris in the center, causing peripheral anterior synechia. At times, we come across certain pre-existing causes like plateau iris and pigmentary glaucoma, that is posterior bowing of the mid-peripheral iris. Intraocular inflammation is evident by presence of the exudation, maybe so much of exudate with iris inflammation or pupillary membrane, excessive exudation directly clogging the angle and trabecular meshwork, or trabeculitis causing glaucoma, and in a long run, there is extensive fibrosis. This is the most common picture seen in cases of pseudophakic glaucoma, that is chronic postoperative uveitis will cause posterior synechia, may be causing optic capture at the edge or in the center of the lens, and thereby pupillary block. So there is iris bombi, and after few days or hours, it will be resulting into peripheral anterior synechia and a damage in form of glaucoma. Or as I told you, optic or haptic may be causing uveitis by touch to the ciliary body or iris. This is not unusual to see, that is iris cyst formation due to inflammation, and glaucoma is bound to occur. Following triple surgery, we can see synechia either at the edge of the host graft junction and secondary glaucoma, or it may be because of the optic capture. Excessive lens matter following surgery may be in the angle, or in anterior chamber, and in some cases it is so much that it is pushing the IOL forward and thereby pushing the iris and causing peripheral anterior synechia. Presence of silicone oil and zipping of the angle by neovascular glaucoma, all are evident. In this patient, in certain quadrants, the angle was narrow, and UBM showed that it is being pushed, iris is being pushed by the haptic of the lens on one side. This young myopic had both eye phakic IOL. One eye he was very happy, the fellow eye intermittent redness and diminution of vision, and all the examinations, slit lamp, gonioscopy, ASOCT didn't show anything. And then UBM showed that the phakic IOL was inserted upside down. It was removed and reinserted. Patient was very happy thereafter. In the same way, if there is intense ciliary body edema, it will push the IOL to one side and cause chronic irritation in the eye, secondary glaucoma. After a month, it diagnosed by UBM, which is not possible by other techniques. And after a month of treatment, patient was very well. In pediatric pseudophakic glaucoma, also excessive lens matter or excessive fibrosis, as we suspect, will cause secondary glaucoma. This is just to compare. It's a beautiful delineation, but the cause will be evident on UBM only. So to conclude, ultrasound biomicroscopy has a unique role in evaluating the etiological factors responsible for pseudophakic glaucoma, and thereby we decide our plan of management, and patient is very happy finally. Thank you. Thank you so much for including me in your team. Thank you, Mayruben.
Thank you. Excellent, Hansa. You came out with so many examples.
Thank you so much.
Now I will share my presentation. At the end of our all talks, we will have Dr. Wallace giving us a keynote address. At present, he is not available, so I will start with my presentation. I will be talking on how anterior-segment imaging is helpful in evaluating the post-antiglaucoma surgery patients. The trabeculectomy is still the most effective filtering surgery, even though more and more surgical options are arising these days. And the long-term data show the efficient control of intraocular pressure up to 67% of initial successful trabeculectomy after 15 years. This study has shown that. Now, this graph is showing us that the failure of the trabeculectomy is seen as a steep fall in the early area. Up to 20 months, you can see the steep fall in the success rate, and later on, it becomes almost a straight line. So we have to identify which are those cases which are possibly going to fail in the early postoperative period. And various classifications are available to know the BLAP morphology, which is an important indicator for the BLAP functionality. First is the Murphy classification, then the Indiana classification, which includes the Seidel test also, along with the BLAB height, extent, vascularity. And then the another one which has been introduced in 2017 is MABEX classification, which also includes the transparency of the BLAB with the height and vascularity of the structure. And it also has the comparison. If we compare all three, then the MABEX classification will give you not only the BLAB transparency, but also the microcyst evaluation and the conjunctival mobility in the area of the BLAB. But all these may not be possible in all the patients. You cannot predict who will fail and who will be successful. So with the help of imaging, in vivo evaluation of post-trabeculectomy BLAB is possible. Being a non-contact technique, you can use anterior segment OCT even in the early area or first week of the surgery, where UBM you may not like to use. So it will give you microscopic cross-sectional view. It is shown here, and multiple data can be seen on this. It can show you the subconjunctival fluid spaces, separations, BLAB wall. Its morphology will tell you about the functionality. Suprascleral space, then root beneath, which is patent or not, sclerostomy, and iridectomy. So I will be talking on this in my further lecture. Various studies are there in the literature, and we have also published our study, which suggests that anterior segment OCT is a promising tool. And with the help of that, you can assess the filtering BLAB functionality in the early postoperative period. It demonstrates the feature of BLAB morphology, which are not visible with the slit lamp, and thereby help in evaluating these functions. The ideal BLAB is shown on the left-hand side, and it is vascularity should be similar to the surrounding conjunctiva. Numerous microcysts could be there. Diffuse BLAB more on the posterior side with the moderate elevation. But if you see carefully here, the ASOCT has given you a better evaluation. Similarly, the slit lamp finding is showing you here the elevated BLAB, but the ASOCT has given you other morphological features, what is happening underneath. Now, this is a good looking BLAB, may not be always a good functioning BLAB. As it is shown here, this BLAB has aqueous cavity here, but the wall is very thick, homogeneous, which is suggestive of failure or the fibroblastic activity. Now we know that the cause of BLAB failure is vascularization and fibroplasia underneath the subconjunctival space or in the episcleral space. Another cause could be the obstruction of internal ostium by iris or ciliary process or fibrin tissue. This can be identified by using the gonioscopy. So can we predict the BLAB failure early? Can we recognize it early? Can we prevent it, or can we manage it in a better fashion? So the most important step in the management of the failing BLAB is to recognize its presence. And the study we undertook with the aim to correlate these morphological features of BLAB of anterior segment OCT at 1 month with the BLAB function or surgical success at 6 months. 2 sections are taken from the highest BLAB elevation, radial as well as the tangential sections were taken. And the bleb wall was divided into the uniform reflectivity and multiform reflectivity. Again, multiform bleb wall reflectivity is divided into multiple internal layers as shown here, subconjunctival separation. These two all are suboptimal as far as the success is concerned, but the multiple microcysts as shown here is ideal bleb and always guarantee the success. Now, root beneath the scleral flap doesn't make any significant difference as far as the failure and success is concerned. So these are our results. And as I said, the microcyst with the subconjunctival separation in early phase shows the 100% success rate at the end of 6 months. So you can predict at 1 month the long-term success. The bleb wall with multiform reflectivity shows the highest chance of the success. Another study, Japanese study, has shown the results, and they have predicted that the width of filtration's opening can also be affecting the success rate. Again, remember that 2 eyes bleb may have behaved differently as shown in this patient. And this is a case where you have seen that there is a flat bleb. So are we going to do something for this? And the IOP is showing the rising titer. So the releasable suture before removal, you can see the homogeneous bleb wall here, hardly any aqueous pockets. Immediately after the releasing the suture, you can see the subconjunctival separation as well as the microcystic areas. And that makes the patient successful for long term. So these are some of the dreaded complications of mitomycin use. And these are the patients where we need a safer option. So nowadays, a lot of people are, and I am also using Ologen bleb. So what happens to that Ologen bleb? So to study that natural bleb history, we also did a study. Ologen implant usually biodegrade in 90 to 180 days or more, and leaving in its space a fibrous sponge, the negative copy of the original one. So this is how it has been on the early post-operative period. There is a homogeneous area of this bleb. The Ologen is seen here, and later on, after the 6 months, you can see the shrinkage of the bleb as well as the Ologen implant. So this is how on day 1, there is anoic area, aqueous area here, but homogeneous area of the implant is seen here without any aqueous cavity or subconjunctival separation like MMC bleb. This is after 1 week. After 3 months, you can see the aqueous pockets are coming up in this area. Suprascleral space has now aqueous into that anoic space. Here also small cavities are coming up. So at the end of 6 months, a big area of the aqueous pockets are seen, shrinkage of the Ologen in this area, and small areas of aqueous pockets in the peripheral part of the bleb. So these blebs are thick blebs, but safer blebs. You can also see the success of the express CFD. Here you can see how it is being placed away from the irises. And Tenon cyst, you can see nicely, even on the slit lamp, you can see it. But this is to show you that after the needling, you can see the flattening of the cyst. And after the 6 months, small, large aqueous cavity, but less in elevated bleb. So implication, ASOCT can identify the internal structure of the bleb, thereby providing better understanding of the bleb morphology, and you can manage your patients accordingly. It is a non-contact technique, can be a good adjunct to the clinical classification in assessing the functionality or the functional outcome of the bleb. And scope of the early intervention in the blebs with a poor function outcome. You can enhance the steroid dose, 5-FU injection with needling can be done, and you can release your suture if you have any. Thank you very much. Now, I will invite Dr. Deepanjan. Deepanjan, can you?
Yes, I'm there.
Deepanjan is a senior consultant, glaucoma and cataract services, Disa Eye Hospital, Kolkata. He is a vice president of Kolkata Academy of Ophthalmology, formerly chief medical officer, with the Priyamvada Birla Arvind Eye Hospital, Kolkata. Executive former member of the Glaucoma Society of India as well as OSWD. So I request you to present your day. He will give us unbiased opinion. What is the present day status of intersegment imaging?
Good morning to all, and many thanks, Dr. Mayuri, for such kind words. And I am already enriched by all these lectures, and I am just going to make a summary of the whole thing. So, what is the present day status? If we start with the slide that is called PACT, the first slide is PACT, the major beneficiary. I personally feel that with a high visual morbidity, and if we do an early detection of anatomically narrow angles, it is extremely important. And if we can combine of various anti-segment imaging technique, we get a clear picture of angle anatomy that help us to make appropriate treatment decisions. Indentation gonioscopy is still the gold standard for assessment of the angle by simply the fact that it can assess the occludability much easily. But there are drawbacks, there are subjective variation, the types of lenses are different, there is a little bit long learning curve, and there may be variation in ambient illumination. Placement of the lens or mechanical compression can make a difference. And we need to avoid in damaged epithelium, can't be opaque corneas and things like that. So the objective assessment of anterior chamber angle can be done photographically by either Pentacam or ICAM, or optically by UBM or OCT. So ICAM is a portable handheld device which under dark illumination in supine position using a coupling gel, and it does a direct imaging of anterior chamber angle through a wide field lens, and the image captured by a digital video camera and assessed in the computers. And it has been shown that this is a good objective method of visualization and moderate to excellent inter and inter-observer reliability, good agreement with the gonioscopy in several studies. But on the other hand, there is poor depth assessment in narrow angle recess when compared to ASOCT, and it is influenced by position-related changes, just like UBM. Pentacam, it images the anterior segment from cornea to posterior surface of the lens in 3D image. Direct visualization of angle recess is not possible because the light doesn't penetrate so easily deep into the sclera, and uses a straight line to describe a curved plane iris, so there can be inaccuracies in angle width measurement. Anterior segment OCT and UBM are two most commonly used devices for anterior segment imaging, where anterior segment OCT is a non-contact rapid imaging device that uses low coherence interferometry to obtain cross-sectional images. The measurements are semi-automatic and have good reproducibility, and it is non-operator dependent and can easily done by a sitting position, as known to have higher sensitivity when detecting angle closure compared to gonioscopy. And when we go through the different ages of anterior segment OCT, from time domain to spectral domain to now available SWAP source OCTs, the scan speed has increased from 200 per second to 20,000 per second. But we need to remember the basic thing that when the wavelength is shorter, there may be better resolution but lower scan depth. And if we have a higher wavelength, just like in SSOCT or SWAP source, there is enhanced depth of penetration of the light beam, so we get fantastic resolution, and which is definitely repeatable and reproducible. The qualitative assessment has been covered up beautifully by Dr. Medha, but we should understand that the important landmark to identify the ASOCT images is the scleral spar, which is visible as an inward projection of the sclera, and apposition between the iris and the inner corneoscleral wall has been used as a qualitative method of detecting angle closure. Quantitative assessment of the angle is possible with the built-in software, which requires identification of the spar, and several parameters have shown good reproducibility, like angle opening distance, angle recess area, and TISA, like trabecular eye space area. Several new ASOCT parameters have been associated with angle closure, including smaller AC width, smaller AC area, lower AC volume, larger lens fault, and greater iris curvature. And for diagnosis of angle closure glaucoma, ASOCT can detect clinically important changes in the antechamber angle structure in patients with angle closure glaucoma under light versus dark condition. And also, ASOCT can demonstrate widening of the angle after laser PI, and also there is a longitudinal there is a study from this ZAP trial group where they have evaluated longitudinal changes of angle configuration in primary angle closure suspects. They saw that the primary angle widening was significantly reduced to 6 months, and it hinted towards the non-pupillary mechanism that may contribute to the primary angle closure glaucoma. So not only the diagnosis of angle closure glaucoma, ASOCT can predict angle closure also. We can look at this study by Dr. Bhaskaran et al. From Singapore, who enrolled a cohort of 342 subjects with gonioscopically open angle, but hydrotrabecular contact detected by recent OCT. The subjects with more quadrants of ASOCT angle closure at the baseline had a greater chance of developing gonioscopic angle closure after 4 years, which was statistically significant. The new kid in the block is the SwebSource FDOCT device, Cassia 1000, or now the Antirion is also available from Spectralis, and these machines can rapidly obtain high-resolution scan with 3D reconstruction of the anterior segment. As we know that the 50 to 28% of the ASOCT images are unable to identify the scleral spot properly, SPAR is best identified with SSO, this web source technique, just because the scan depth is fantastic and the resolution is superb. So the SSOCT is also excellent in calculating iris volume, which has been shown to be important determinant of AC angle. Coming to hydrotrabecular contact index, which is an assessment of circumferential 360-degree angle closure, and the recent study by Bhaskaran et al. Demonstrated that this ITC index has a good diagnostic performance compared to gonioscopy for estimating the angle closure. And automated angle grading by the software programs such as ITC index are likely the future for ASOCT. But there are limitations of the ASOCT. It cannot image beyond posterior pigment epithelium of the iris. And there is no use in opaque corneas and pediatric glaucomas. Quantitative assessment depends heavily upon accurate identification of the scleral spar. So now there is some suggestion that the new landmarks like Schwalbe's line or Bell, that is band of extracanalicular level lamina, should be used. And overall, there is no normative database. As we know, there is a lot of different variations in biometric measurements of the eye. So coming to UBM, which is a high frequency ultrasound at 50 to 100 megahertz, where the sound waves are converted to high resolution B-scan images in lower axial resolution than ASOCT. It has got lower axial resolution, and the field of view is smaller, the image acquisition is slow, and the Nielsen immersion scale or clear scan water balloon. But UBM has good agreement with gonioscopy in its ability to evaluate angle closure in a dark room. That is, it is invaluable for structures with posterior to the iris pigment epithelium, as we know that the sound penetrates the pigment epithelium but the light does not. And it is particularly useful in opaque corneas and congenital glaucomas, and the anterior chamber angle parameters in angle PACD, it measured by both UBM and ASOCT, had similar values, sensitivity, specificity, and reproducibility. These are some beautiful pictures from this wonderful review by Dr. Jessica et al. Particularly, if you can look through this image where this was like a muscular syndrome, where it actually looked like an anterior segment synechia on gonioscopy, which later it discovered to be a ciliary body tumor. The take-home message that ASOCT is the clear winner in assessing anterior chamber angle when the cornea is clear and the patient can sit upright. UBM should be used when the cornea is cloudy and you suspect a pathology that resides behind the iris frame hiding. Both technologies allow the acquisition and comparison of the objective data and parameters not possible in slit-lamp biomicroscopy or gonioscopy. ASOCT and UBM proved to be useful adjuncts, but can never replace clinical examination. And probably this is the future that is called deep learning. It's an artificial intelligence function that imitates the working of the human brain in processing data and making decision algorithms. Application of the deep learning algorithms to assess antechamber angle and ASOCT images has shown excellent results, and probably it is comparable to the diagnostic ability of a very well-trained ophthalmologist. So thank you for your kind attention, and thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Deepanjal. And now, as we are running short of time, I would like to thank all my faculties for being here and giving their excellent presentation. Now we have the keynote address. The speaker is not available, so we will play the video and then we will conclude our session. Thank you all of you for being here with me.
So before I interrupt, Mayuri ma'am, we have Dr. Wallace as the keynote speaker. And to introduce Dr. Wallace has completed his glaucoma fellowship at the Bascom Palmer Eye Institute, and he joined the faculty of University of Iowa as the director of the glaucoma services. When he transitioned to emeritus status in 2020, he was professor and vice chairman and held Frederick C. Lodi Endowed Chair. So he has authored 2 textbooks, that's the Color Atlas of Gonioscopy and Requisites in Glaucoma, and 1 iBook, the Iowa Glaucoma Curriculum. So he's a great glaucoma surgeon, and he's going to talk about the pearls for a successful gonioscopy. So backend team, please request you to play the keynote address of Dr. Wallace.
Hello to my friends in India. My name is Lee Ulward at the University of Iowa, and it's a real honor for me to have the chance to talk to you today about gonioscopy. We use gonioscopy to overcome total internal reflection, where light from the iridocorneal angle strikes at such a shallow angle with the tear-air interface that it's totally reflected back inside. And again, this happens at the tear-air interface where there's a big change in index of refraction. This is exactly what happens in a fiber optic cable where the light strikes at such a shallow angle that it's totally reflected back inside. And we can overcome this by 2 techniques, a direct and an indirect technique. The direct technique places a domed lens so that this angle at which the light exits is steeper, and the observer can look directly into the iridocorneal angle. There are a variety of lenses that could be used for this. We're mostly interested in the surgical lenses today, the Swan-Jacobs lens and other variations. This used to be a clinical technique back before my time, but it was very cumbersome and so very rarely used. You'd have to have a lot of reason to want to do gonioscopy on a patient. But usually I would only use direct gonioscopy for angle surgery, in this case doing a goniotomy on a little baby. With the advent of minimally invasive glaucoma surgeries, the MIGS, direct gonioscopy has become really important again as a tool for things like the iStent or GATT, gonioscopy-assisted transluminal trabeculotomy. So I think we're all now motivated to become good at direct gonioscopy. And my tips for this are to practice getting a surgical view when you don't need it. Maybe at the end of a cataract surgery or other surgery, set the microscope and lens up and just take a look at the iridocorneal angle. Be good at getting a view of the angle. So here I am doing a goniotomy. You can see that I have the microscope tilted back towards me. The patient is tilted away from me so that I can look directly into the angle. And lastly, become a great gonioscopist. Work in the clinic at understanding the anatomy of the iridocorneal angle so that when you're in there surgically, it's not all muddled for you. Indirect gonioscopy is what we use in the clinic, where light strikes a mirror and comes back parallel to the optical axis. I typically in the clinic will use a 4-mirror lens. The prototype is the Zeiss lens, which is no longer made. But the advantage of the 4-mirror lenses are that they're convenient. It's easy to see the whole angle. They're great for indentation, which we're going to talk about in a second here. The downsides are that it's a little bit harder to master than the Goldmann style big lens, and it requires a very light touch. So seeing corneal folds should not be part of your routine exam. So again, you can see all four parts of the angle without moving the lens. If you just move it a few degrees, you can see all 360 degrees. I use a Posner style lens, which is basically a Zeiss lens, but now made out of plastic with a incorporated handle. I like the handle. Some people prefer the Sussman lens, which has no handle, and that's kind of whatever your choice. I don't have time to go over all the examination techniques, but I really want to talk about two things: corneal wedge and indentation, because if you learn these two things, it will make you a better gonioscopist. The corneal wedge is a way of identifying Schwalbe line, or the anterior border of the trabecular meshwork. You take a very bright, narrow beam, offset it from your oculars, and that will split it into two lines on the cornea, a very crisp internal beam and a sort of fat and fuzzy external beam. And they illuminate the face of the sclera, the scleral corneal interface here, and they join up as Schwalbe line. As we can see in this painting, you can use the joining of these two lines to identify Schwalbe line, the anterior border of the meshwork. So this is when it's most useful. This is a young boy, very little pigment, and I would never be able to find his trabecular meshwork except I find the meeting point of these two lines, and that is Schwalbe line right there. Similarly, if you have too much pigment, the corneal wedge can tell you where the trabecular meshwork starts. This eye has lots of stuff going on, but if I follow the internal and external beams, it tells me that this is the anterior border of the trabecular meshwork here. All this stuff up here is a Sampilaci line. And I would have been lost in this angle without the corneal wedge. This is an eye in which I have absolutely no idea what's going on. But by using the corneal wedge, I can see that all of this stuff, all this pigment is behind Schwalbe line. So this is all meshwork here and ciliary body face down here. And I actually would never have guessed that based on the appearance otherwise. This is an eye where the angle is almost closed, and you can see that there's just the Schwalbe's line is right here just above the iris. And in this eye, the angle is closed. The two lines run parallel off into the distance like railroad tracks. One tip for this to find the corneal wedge is to have the patient look slightly away from the examining mirror. That allows you to look more onto the cornea. Indentation gonioscopy is really critical. You need a lens that has a small area of contact, like a Posner or Sussman lens. And when one pushes in, you can see the corneal folds. This side of the angle stays tethered closed with synechia. This side opens up. This is an angle that's closed. I indent, you can see the corneal folds, and I can see the trabecular meshwork. This is an example here. This is just a Sampilaci line. This is a closed angle, and as I indent, you will see the trabecular meshwork really pretty easily come into view. So this is an eye you would anticipate would do great with an iridotomy. Again, it's closed. I push, and it opens up. This is a really interesting angle. I initially would think that this is trabecular meshwork, scleral spur. I'm going to do a trabeculoplasty. I'm going to come fire along here. But when I indent this eye, what you'll discover is that actually was not the trabecular meshwork. That's just a Sampolesi line. That's what I thought was meshwork and spur. But this is actually a trabecular meshwork and scleral spur. And if I had done a trabeculoplasty there, I would have just welded the angle closed. I find indentation really helpful for plateau iris syndrome, whereas we know the ciliary body is very far forward. There's a very steep drop off in the periphery. If I did a Van Herrick test, the angle would look fairly wide open, and that would deceive me. On gonioscopy, what I see is that when I indent, I push the iris back, it forms a double hump. It drapes over the ciliary body and then drapes over the lens. And this is really great for diagnosing plateau iris. I indent here, and I can see this roll, and I can see trabecular meshwork. And just an example here, steep drop off in the periphery, I'm pushing, and you can see this roll in the periphery, almost like you can imagine that the ciliary body is holding this iris up. All of these materials are available on my gonioscopy and curriculum websites, which are free resources. Thank you.
It's a very excellent, very patiently explained the whole topic on gonioscopy by Dr. Wallace. So, Zubi, we still have time for the next session to start. I think the session they finished
No,
well
the panel
advanced in time.
discussion is still left, sir.
Yeah,
for this
so I
session.
request Dr. Mayuri to please take over the session and continue with the panel discussion. Dr. Mayuri, Dr. Deepanjan,
You have stopped my video.
pardon?
Host has stopped my video.
The host has stopped our video.
Now
Oh,
it
no.
is.
Okay. Fine now?
Okay. Any questions from the audience? We don't have any. Rest of the
So the
faculty.
Q&A is empty. You can discuss among yourself.
I know. So where would you like to advise people, Deepanjan, that this is the case that you have to have an imaging done? Which are those cases?
After gonioscopy, you feel that you need an imaging.
But that I need imaging to be done in this particular case.
I think the moment we see a double hump pattern, like that Chandrimati was telling, if in a plateau iris situation, where we suspect any peripheral, we see a peripheral iris roll in gonioscopy, and we suspect something big behind that actually cannot be seen. Or if a gonioscopy we see a typically in an iris situation, a small area of elevation, which is not exactly looking like a pass. Probably we are going to have an iris cyst if we do an UVM. So,
Okay.
yeah.
I have seen one case of mine. She had bilateral glaucoma with the posterior pushing mechanism and had a multiple ciliary body cyst. So those are when you see multiple irregular bumps in the gonioscopy,
Yes.
single bump or multiple. Those are the cases I would suggest that you should do UBM in those cases.
Yeah,
And anything different? Yes, Chandrima.
I just wanted to say that the guest speaker actually showed it beautifully, I think, when he said when you do an indentation gonioscopy and the peripheral iris drapes over the ciliary body and the lens, and you see that double hump out there, that's when you need to do a UBM or an anterior segment. I think he did that beautifully, very nicely shown.
Yeah. Hansa?
Yes, especially in a very small ciliary body mass, because we have come across such people, that very small narrowing at a very small quadrant, it was there on gonioscopy and it was doubtful. And then we did ultrasound biomicroscopy, and only a small hypoechoic, very well demarcated shadow, and it was suspected to be malignant melanoma of the ciliary body. But it was so small that somebody did the biopsy, and the tissue was not from exactly that area. And after a couple of months, the patient had disseminated malignant melanoma all over the body. So I think UBM gives us a very good information about the ciliary body. Some small cysts are also encountered time and again, which gives intermittent rise of pressure. And patient has very small headache and a little diminution of vision. He gives history. When he comes, then we cannot find out anything. But if UBM, I think at least to rule out, we should do UBM in those cases.
Okay, so if you have any small tumor or nevus in the angle, I suggest that you have to have a UBM done to rule out any primary or secondary in the angle. Sunil bhai, any comment from you?
So it's basically anti-signal imaging is usually for the posterior chamber evaluation. So anytime you suspect anything beyond the iris, I think that's when UBM and anti-segment OCT will take over. So a general view, you will get a direct view on the gonioscopy. But if you want a detailed evaluation or you want a kind of a measurement of something particular, that's when the these additional imaging devices would help us.
Medha?
Yes, same. I agree with all. So definitely gonioscopy has certain indications. ASOCT, if you want to quantitatively see whether the angle is, how the angle is responding, and no, like screening. I know that sometimes it happens that I'm very busy and the optometrist or my assistant comes to me and see whether you want to dilate this patient. Then I always say that you do ASOCT, let me see how his angle is behaving, and then I'll let you know. If I don't have time to see the patient on a Van Eyck or do a gonioscopy, so that's the fastest thing I can do. So that's where ASOCT helps me right now. And the next thing is UBM, as everyone has discussed. So UBM, every imaging technique and including gonioscopy has definitely a role in our ASOCT imaging or ASOCT diagnosing armament.
Okay, there is a question.
All right, ma'am, there are 2 questions, yes.
Any tips for the identification of scleral spur in UBM? Medha, to you.
Actually, the same thing like what we see on ASOCT, that is the inward protrusion of the sclera, is the scleral spur. So same applies for UBM also. UBM also gives you a cross-sectional beautiful image. So here also you can definitely see where the scleral spur is and then go forward from that.
Okay. Another question here is, there are times where is the neither segment OCT reveals more information than the slit length. Still you are saying that clinical examination is so important. It is both are important. I think the answer itself is there. Both the techniques, one should have the thorough clinical examination, as well as you can use the ASOCT. If you have access to any imaging technique, then you can use to recon. It can be adjunct to many of the glaucoma diagnosis. So
I would like to add one more thing. ASOCT will give you horizontal or the section where you want to take. Each and every ASOCT will not have a 360-degree sections on the machine. So what you can do is gonioscopy, within few minutes, you can make out what is going on 360 degrees. That is, each and every angle would be visualized. So for that thing, definitely gonioscopy will help, and ASOCT may not help there.
ASOCT is particularly bad in inferior angles, no, madam?
Yes.
Only thing with ASOCT is that, the patient is relatively comfortable, because with the UBM,
Yes.
the patient has to lie down and you have to put that water bath and all that. And the other day I was just talking to Shushmita, because they are the only people who have the sitting UBM. But she said that she's not satisfied with it at all, because that cup that you have to use is difficult, and then you have to change it in COVID times. Like, you've got to wash it with soap and water and then use it in patient after patient. And she feels that it doesn't do justice to UBM as a supine position does, basically. Because the moment you're sitting and you put the water, some of the water trickles out actually. And you really don't get a very good authentic report.
The Quantel give a cuff, a sleeve. There you have a small rubber bag.
Yeah.
And with every use, you have to throw those rubber bags. And it has to be, they advise.
Single-use bags.
But
Yeah.
the special jelly is available. They advise us to use that jelly, and which is very expensive. So we are using only BSS, partly distilled water for that. But you are absolutely right. In this COVID era, we are very careful about using the UBM. That you have to be very careful. That's it. Okay. So if there is no more question, we finish it little early. Thank you everyone for being here. And I think everyone has done justice to that talk, and we are getting a lot of information. Even I have learned a lot from all of you from today's lecture. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Mayuri.
Thank you,
Also
Mayuri ma'am.
to
I
the
think the
speaker.
whole
Good
team has
afternoon.
covered up the session so nicely. I feel one of the very important session which was attended by many, I think. Lot of useful information. Thank you once again, one and all.
Actually,
Thank you.
everyone
Thank you.
has come out with something new, which is new to me too. So they have done their homework thoroughly. So I'm very
COVID has taught everybody
I
how
just
to
want to
conduct because
ask if
everybody is
we
free
are
now.
not, has anyone experienced that 360-degree Nidec automatic photography of a gonioscopy, which he takes? Because they had kept a demo over me for a few days. So I didn't like it.
No idea. No idea.
No,
Have you
okay.
tried that?
No, yeah, I have tried. They had kept at my place for 2 weeks. But the most important thing is the lighting was too much and there was a lot of noise. So I said, if you can reduce these two, then only it will be helpful. It will not be helpful if because every angle looked open.
Yeah, because people will get constantly. Are they using flashlight constantly?
Yeah,
So it is not.
With too much of light.
yeah,
So
it's too much. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
all.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.